Few bands have been through quite so much as Fleetwood Mac, and when a band is so overcome with love, anger, jealousy, and success, a few mistruths and urban myths are bound to spring up. Here are some of the false things you may believe about Fleetwood Mac. When most people think of Fleetwood Mac, the first songs that come to mind are pop rock hits such as Rhiannon or Dreams. Indeed, the arena rock sound that dominated charts in the late 1960s and 70s had a significant influence on the group. Still, Fleetwood Mac didn't actually begin as a California sound pop rock group. They were originally a blues band that sought to pay tribute to their American blues heroes. The original Fleetwood Mac lineup was born out of the remnants of another band, John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Mayall had been a staple in British electric blues since the 1950s, earning him the honorific title of the Godfather of British blues. John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, and Peter Green weren't the only musicians who got their start with Mayall either. Eric Clapton, Mick Taylor, and Andy Fraser all passed through Mayall's Blues Breakers before finding later success.
John usually chooses the people he wants. Chooses very carefully, he knows what he wants, he usually gets it too.
Green was selected by Mayall to replace Clapton, who departed to form the supergroup Cream. No easy task, sure, but Green's tenure in the band was successful enough to make him a music legend in his own right. And it was only then that he left to form Fleetwood Mac with McVie, Fleetwood, and slide guitarist Jeremy Spencer. Fleetwood Mac has had a revolving door of band members over the years, and surprisingly enough, that included John McVie. For the first 3 months of Fleetwood Mac's existence, another man played bass while McVie continued to play in the Blues Breakers. This early version of Fleetwood Mac made their debut at the 1967 National Jazz and Blues Festival, with Bob Brunning on bass. While Green, Fleetwood, and McVie were all members of John Mayall's Blues Breakers, McVie had been a member longer than the other two, and had looked to Mayall as a kind of mentor. As such, he didn't want to leave to form another group, especially once he doubted he could stand out against legions of other British blues bands. So McVie stayed with the Blues Breakers, and Green and Fleetwood brought on Brunning, a college student who was a member of the group Fives Company. Despite understanding that McVie would become the group's bassist if he left the Blues Breakers, Brunning left school and took the job. McVie eventually left Mayall, however, and Brunning's stint in Fleetwood Mac was over. In the end, he only played on one recorded song, Long Grey Mare, that featured on their debut album. Brunning went on to play in a number of other bands, later became an educator, and even opened his own blues club. Despite the fact that the band is named after them, drummer Mick Fleetwood and bassist John McVie weren't actually seen as the band's leaders in their early days. Although Fleetwood would become de facto leader later on, at the beginning, the leadership role fell on Peter Green. In fact, Green's command of the band was so great that around their first album, the band was known as Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Green was far from a dictator though. A rather humble man, he didn't enjoy being considered a guitar hero. He even told guitarist Jeremy Spencer that he had planned to one day leave the band, and so wanted to give the bandmates something in return. He said, "They're my friends. What are they going to have? I'm going to leave them with a name." Hence, Fleetwood Mac was born, when Green combined the names of Mick Fleetwood and John McVie. Green also pushed back at the label's decision to name their self-titled debut album Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and it was released with his name removed. When discussing his friend and ex-bandmate, Fleetwood had this to say to the Irish Times: "Peter could have been the stereotypical superstar guitar player and control freak, but that wasn't his style. Peter Green is the reason there's a Fleetwood Mac." British blues in the 1960s was a gold mine for hit singles, and while Fleetwood Mac's later lineup had more commercial and critical success, the Proto-Mac still had plenty to be proud of in those early days. During the period that Peter Green was a member of Fleetwood Mac, the band had 7 songs hit the top 40 on the United Kingdom singles charts, including a #1 hit with the instrumental track Albatross, and their songs Man of the World and Oh Well peaked at #2 on the singles chart. After their self-titled debut failed to generate a single hit, however, the band expanded their sound from strictly blues and brought in influences from different musical elements. Two of their three hits from 1968, Black Magic Woman and Albatross, reflected these changes. The group's second album, Mr. Wonderful, marked this change in sound, as Fleetwood Mac became a band that used the blues as a starting point rather than being a blues band outright. By their third studio album, which was their last with Green, the band were continuing this musical evolution to a pop rock sound, now simply using the blues as a kind of bass influence. The band had doubtless changed a lot since their early days, and Fleetwood Mac were about to find the sound that made them legends. In 1970, after releasing the band's third studio album, Peter Green's mental state had reached its breaking point. Green's undiagnosed schizophrenia and a particularly bad drug trip while on tour in Germany led him to leave the band he had formed. Sadly, Green would be troubled by his mental illness for a long time. Nonetheless, he did come back to play with Fleetwood Mac every now and again. Only 3 years after Green left the band, he returned for a single song on their 1973 album, Penguin, although his contribution to the song, Night Watch, went uncredited. Then, on Mick Fleetwood's 1981 solo album, The Visitor, Green re-recorded his classic song, Rattlesnake Shake, which he had originally recorded with the band in 1969. On one of the band's most successful albums, Tusk, Green played guitar on the song Brown Eyes. In a 1999 interview, Green explained that he didn't even remember recording that song, blaming his ill memory on his declining health during that time period. Luckily, Green eventually overcame his issues with drugs and underwent treatment for his mental health issues. Despite persistent rumors that he might rejoin the group for a live performance in the 2000s, however, this never came to pass before he passed away in July 2020. The beginning of the 1970s and Peter Green's departure from the group marked the end of the original Fleetwood Mac, and you might assume the beginning of the most successful version of the band. But though the lineup that featured Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham became easily the most well-known, there was actually a period between the Green era and the later era that most fans seem to have forgotten. During this in-between period, the remainder of the band released 6 studio albums, more than they put out with either of their other lineups. For their first post-Green album, Kiln House, the group returned to their roots in classic 1950s rock, similar to that of Buddy Holly and Gene Vincent. The album sold poorly, however, and Jeremy Spencer departed the group soon after. Their next album, Future Games, saw keyboardist and singer Christine McVie officially become a member of the group. The wife of John McVie, Christine had contributed to Fleetwood Mac's music since their second album. Unfortunately, Future Games failed to garner much success and was panned by the critics. Their next 4 albums were pretty much more of the same, until Nicks and Buckingham joined for the band's 1975 self-titled album. While Fleetwood Mac were infamous for the relationships between the band's various members, only John and Christine McVie were actually married. Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, though a talented duo and couple before joining the group, never actually got hitched. The pair first met at high school when Nicks came across Buckingham covering the Mamas and the Papas hit song California Dreamin', at which point Nicks spontaneously joined in the harmonies. Buckingham called Nicks 2 years after their initial meeting, asking her to join his band, Fritz. By 1973, Fritz had disbanded, and so Nicks and Buckingham released their first album as a duo and as a couple. 2 years after that album, they were given the opportunity of a lifetime when they joined an already established band, Fleetwood Mac. When Bustle later interviewed Nicks about her life at the time, during a profile on celebrities when they were 28 years old, she said, "I probably have the best 28 story of anybody that you will interview." By this point, however, the relationship was already deteriorating. Nicks claimed that Buckingham was controlling and distrustful, and by the time their second album with Fleetwood Mac rolled around, the pair were writing and recording songs that gave their own versions of their breakup. Speaking about her relationship with Buckingham, Nicks once said, "He and I were about as compatible as a boa constrictor and a rat." For about 4 decades, Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks enjoyed a close relationship that spawned a number of collaborations between them. However, despite their closeness, the pair's relationship always remained platonic. Originally, Petty and Nicks' friendship was pretty one-sided. In the late 1970s, while Nicks was at her peak with Fleetwood Mac, She heard Petty's music as the frontman of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Nicks was so intoxicated by the music that she started modeling her own music after Petty and went to extreme lengths to get in contact with him. Seemingly more than anything else, Nicks wanted to join Petty's band. But Petty declined Nicks's request to join the Heartbreakers. Nonetheless, Petty and his band all played music on Nicks's first solo album, Belladonna, which was produced by Nicks's boyfriend and Petty's producer, Jimmy Iovine. All but one song on the album was written by Nicks, with the other, Stop Draggin' My Heart, being written by Petty himself. At the time, Petty had given Nicks a different song to perform, Insider, but she returned it to him because she saw how much he loved it. Nicks requested a different song, and Stop Draggin' My Heart was the result. The two maintained a close friendship until Petty's death in 2017. Before he passed, Petty gave in to Nicks's original request and finally made her an honorary heartbreaker. They say time heals all wounds, from Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to Dr. Dre and Ice Cube. Bandmates who feud often kiss and make up, after a while, that is. Famously, Fleetwood Mac's Lindsey Buckingham would fight with his bandmates on his worst days, and on his best days there'd still be at least a little tension, most notably between him and his ex-partner Stevie Nicks. While John and Christine McVie have been able to overcome their messy divorce and continue performing to this day, the same cannot be said for Nicks and Buckingham. In fact, this became such a problem for the group that Buckingham was kicked out of Fleetwood Mac in 2018. Buckingham said the boot came from Nicks herself, who gave the band an ultimatum to choose between herself or Buckingham.
And it would be like something as absurd as Mick Jagger saying, either Keith goes or I go, I guess we need the singer.
Naturally, Buckingham responded to the departure by suing his former band. The two sides eventually reached an undisclosed settlement, and Buckingham was replaced with Mike Campbell, guitarist of the Heartbreakers, and Neil Finn of Crowded House. Any hope for a true reunion seems to have been quashed, too, as Mick Fleetwood later told the NME that Buckingham will never again reunite with the band. So, there you have it. Ever-changing lineups, bitter resentment, and endless relationship drama. Who else but Fleetwood Mac? Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.